I always like to start with this photo because I think it's a really great metaphor, especially when you're talking about elite athletes, collegiate athletes in many cases here. And all of these athletes are dealing with a lot of different things. You know, they have kind of a lot of boats in their life, right? And of course, one of them is their sport, but they certainly have relationships and academics and all these other things. And as you well know, if a ripple comes through and hits one of the boats, it generally affects all of them. And that can be really tough for athletes to deal with. But the really good news is when athletes start working on their mental and emotional health, it really raises all the boats in their life, and everything can benefit from it. So a lot of times athletes are really interested in what we're doing because they want to play better, right? And certainly as a coach, that's your motivation, at least one of your motivations as well. But it really does bleed, so to speak, into all aspects of life. And that's really what's exciting for us, and I'm sure exciting for you as well. So I'm going to be talking for about 20 minutes, but feel free to, you know, a lot of times we mute people. So if you have something to do, I'm going to let you mute yourself. But if background noise gets bad, I'll certainly make sure that that's fixed. So you can certainly ask a question and type it in the chat bar. Oh, Coach Cherry, okay, sounds like good, like you muted yourself, so that's good. And this is the agenda. We're going to talk about why you need mental training or why your athletes need it, the science and success metrics behind what we're doing. We're actually going to go into the zone, which is what most of you are here for. And that's going to be a repeat for some of you, because I know some of you I've shown some of this to already. We'll talk a little bit about our clients and how you can get started and pricing. So one of the things that we're noticing is there's really a lot of patterns, and I know that you have athletes like this on your team. You know, maybe they're a little bit of perfectionists, they're probably hard workers, they're very driven. You know, every coach wants those types of athletes, but the flip side of that is they're generally really hard on themselves. They don't always know how to get out of their own brain, out of their own mind, but it's not for lack of wanting it. They want to develop mental toughness. They know that it's an issue. You know, you try to help them, but you know, you can't provide everything for everyone at every moment that they need it. And so athletes really, a lot of times, don't have the tools to develop what they want. And so it goes something like this. You know, you have a big game or a big competition on Saturday night. You know, one of your athletes, I'm sure you can think of one in your head. You don't know if they're going to show up. They're getting kind of nervous, getting ready for the game, and they try to figure it out on their own, right? They talk to their mom, they talk to their boyfriend or girlfriend or roommate. Maybe they go so far as journaling or listening to music, but they just don't have a lot of tools in their toolbox to really get ready for that big competition on Saturday. And they don't really know how they're going to play. They don't feel like they're in control. And as a coach, you don't feel like you're in control either, because you just don't know which of your athletes are sort of accidentally going to show up to play, because sometimes that routine of talking to people and working things out does work. It's just that it's not consistent. So basically what we've done is I was doing consulting with teams and athletes across the country for about 3 years and really felt like athletes needed more, and they really needed it, you know, outside of a seminar, workshop, or outside of your office, or outside of a sports psychologist's office. They needed tools to get ready for a game, after a game, a good game or a bad game. They needed ways to relax. A lot of them are struggling with sleep. They needed short tools that were with them all the time that they could implement really easily, that fits in with sort of their lifestyle and their busyness, and you know, they're on their phones anyway, so they might as well be doing something productive. So this graphic on the side, the positive performance mental training, these are the things that we teach. And again, based on the trainings that I did as an athlete. And you might be doing some of these or all of these or many of these. But what we really provide is, we know athletes need this, whether they're on the scout team, a walk-on, or the All-American on your team, that your whole program can be empowered to make these changes, but the structure is really important. And the proactive approach is really important. So typically in the past, sports psychology at least has been very reactive. And if you're lucky enough to have access to a sports psychologist at your institution, that's great, and I encourage you to use that. But a lot of times that's reactive. And what we said is, like I said earlier, everybody needs it, and you can certainly reduce those big issues, the slumps and the low confidence, if it's more proactive. And we've seen really good results with athletes sort of already having those tools in their toolbox when those difficult times come, because they will. We're very results oriented in what we do. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that in a second. And we bring in the latest research. There's a ton coming out right now, whether that's neuroscience, whether that's about mindfulness and meditation, whether that's sports psychology specific. There's just a lot of really interesting things coming out. But at our core, we're athletes. And everything that we teach, everything that I will teach your athletes and all of us at Positive Performance is based on real life and real experiences and what to do, that clutch serve at the end of the game, or reacting after you have a bad race, you lose by hundredths of a second. Like, we know those situations, and we give athletes real tools to deal with those situations. And sort of in that same light, we're very action oriented. So, my experience in athletics, except for sort of these two people that taught me mental training, it was a lot of talk. And that's one of the reasons that coaches come to us, is because they feel like in sports, it's a lot of talk about mental toughness and talk about resilience and talk about these things. And there's no other part of athletics that's talk, right? If we need stronger legs, we go into the weight room. If we need to work on some skill, we go work on it. And athletes really respond well to being told what to do for the mental side of the game, and it really excites them. So I promised the results. We were seeing great results with our teams, but a lot of it was anecdotal. And we were hearing, yes, our athletes are feeling more confident. Yes, they're going into tests and they're telling us that they're more relaxed and they got better grades and all these things. But we wanted to really see the numbers and see if what we were doing was affecting sort of the stat line. And so we partnered with University of Washington Foster School of Business, and we said, okay, these are the teams we've worked with. Are we seeing anything? And we saw those teams winning 50% more games over the previous year. We saw them playing better defense, and we saw them playing better offense. And these are women's basketball teams at that point. We were working with a lot of women's basketball teams. And so the 15% obviously is significant. Some of those percentage points, I was like, okay, that's, they're not huge. But then you think about really any sport, and in this case, women's basketball, and the average game is won or lost by 5 points or less. And whatever your sport, whether it's volleyball, whether it's rowing, it really comes down to a lot of mental mistakes, one or two moments that can change the course of a game or a competition, and of course change the course of your season. So, these little percentage points can really add up and be quite significant. So you can read these testimonials if you want. We have a lot more on our site as well. But one, like I said earlier, we're hearing a lot that this is affecting athletes in their life, and that's awesome. That's one of our goals as well, as performance. And then that second quote from an athlete, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but athletes generally, in my experience working with a lot of different athletes at a lot of different levels, they know this is an issue for them. And they're generally really excited when they think there's a solution, there's something that they can actually do to improve this part of their game that's been so frustrating for them. So a little bit about the myths and the facts and the science behind what we're doing. The first one, and both of these are really significant for me. The first is that mental toughness is a born trait. And I think that this is something that when you see that mental toughness in an athlete, it seems very natural. And I know for myself, it was something that I really worked on. And science is now telling us and showing us through neuroscience that these skills can be learned. And that's awesome news, because I'm sure as a coach, there's a limited amount of mentally tough 17 and 18-year-olds. You could probably argue there's very few. And so the good news is that athletes really can learn, and they can develop new neural pathways, which is a little bit of a tongue twister, but we all can. But especially under the age of 25, they used to think the brain was rather static after the age of 12, and they're now realizing that in fact it changes throughout our whole life. The second one is the team that is better will win. And they did a study on Olympic athletes. And I really like this study, because what they looked at is they looked at three things in athletes. They looked at mental readiness. They looked at physical readiness, as in how good a shape they're in. And they looked at skill and technique. And I think all sports boil down to those three things. But what they found was in these Olympians, the only predictor of success was that mental readiness. And I think that's really true when you're talking about elite athletics. I don't know that it's true at the lower levels, middle school or maybe even high school. But you start talking about elite high school or club or collegiate or professional, and as you know, the mental component becomes more and more important. So a little bit about our training. I know a lot of people want to know sort of how does this actually work? And just I'm going to take you into the application, but basically what happens in the beginning is you choose whether that's the head coach or a strength coach or an assistant coach that sort of decides to be the person for mental training in your program. Excuse me. We set you up, we onboard you, we get you all trained and ready to roll, and that's either virtually like we're doing right now. We do a ton of those, or in person where one of our coaches flies out and works with your team. Then your athletes start on their workouts. They first baseline on an assessment, and I'll show you that. But they have 20 workouts, and so they generally do 1 to 2 a week, and those take about 20 minutes. Then they go into practicing the tools more, and that's generally about 10 minutes a day. And a lot of that's done through their mobile app, so they can do it, in the training room, they can do it in the back of the bus, they can do it at night. Some of that you'll probably do before practice, so it's pretty easy to get it in. And then you'll have access through your next season. So, Carrie, I think we've talked about this, but as a volleyball team, you would do it this spring and summer, bring your new athletes on, and then that fall when your season starts, you still have access. We want you to go through the training, but then we want you to have access to all the pregame tools and all the postgame tools and all the meditations through your season so you can really see the results sort of in real time. There's a combination of individual training and group, and the group comes in what we call mental huddles. The site and everything your athletes write on the site is confidential. So, and I'll go into that a little bit when we go into the application. But you can track your athletes' progress. So there's a lot of coaches' reports and that sort of thing. All right. Let me show you this. All right, so this is a coach's account. Okay, so a coach's account, or I should say this is what an athlete's account has. So they have an athlete that has everything but the coach's corner, okay? So the first thing that an athlete's going to do is they're going to take their assessment, and this is going to baseline them on their 6 core principles that we teach, and then they'll take that periodically through the training, and you'll get the results of that. Then a coach will set up, I should say before the assessment or right around, the coach sets up the schedule of when your athletes are going to do the workouts, when you're going to do the mental huddles, maybe even when you do the timeouts that we have athletes do. And you can change this if things happen, but like, for example, spring break, you might not want your athletes to do mental training, or maybe you want them to do more mental training that week. But like finals would be a good example. They have a lot going on, so maybe you don't have any workouts, but you do more another week. And so we really work with you to make sure that schedule fits with what you're doing already. Then athletes start the workouts, and I'll just show you real quick what a workout looks like. Workouts are, there's some big principles they're going to learn. There's usually a case study, so they hear about another athlete and what they're going through and how they benefited from mental training. There's generally some videos. There's always a guided visualization, guided meditation, or breathing exercise. So essentially an audio portion to every workout. And athletes really like that. There's generally a overtime section so they can read a book or they can watch an additional movie or video. This is the visualization or I should say exercise aspect to it. And athletes have these on their phone as well, so they can do that at any time. And then finally, they journal. And journaling is a big part of what we teach. And again, this is confidential. But athletes will start having a record of their ups and downs, and then they can go back and they can review where they are and patterns that they're noticing. They can journal as much as they want. They can go in and do that really at any time. They set their goals through the training. during workout number 3, and this becomes a part of their training as well. So I'm going to show you a timeout real quick. A timeout is, oops. So a timeout, let's see, I didn't finish that. So what a timeout is you go in once a week. This is what your athletes are going to do. And they're going to give themselves a self-score. They're going to click off their goals that they accomplished. They're going to journal. And then they're going to get prepared for the next week by listening to a guided visualization and then setting some goals for the next week. And generally, these are very task specific. So, it's working on your serve, it's doing some extra shoulder exercises for 15 minutes, what have you. And then I want to go into so that's all what the athletes have access to. They have access to all these audio portions as well, and this is on their phone again. And these are all of the workout audios, as well as things like, knock on wood, injuries, sleep, rest and recovery, pre-game, post-game. There's all sorts of guided visualizations, and they start really learning about which ones they like and which ones work for them. The mental huddles, I told you about those earlier. These have been super popular. These are designed to be super easy for you to implement or one of your captains to implement. There's generally an activity, a video to watch, and you can spend extra time on this and make it more personalized to your team, depending on what you're going through. During your season or off season, or you can literally print it off and know that you're ready to run a discussion and run a mental workout for your team. And again, a lot of coaches will delegate this to, all the freshmen can do one, or the seniors or the captains. And, as you can see, we have a lot of different mental huddles. Coaches' guides are designed to be essentially the cliff notes of what your athletes are learning. So if you're going into practice and your athletes didn't work out 2 and 3, but you don't have time to do it because you're scouting or whatever, but you want to just reinforce it, you can essentially read this and get the gist of what your athletes learned. And then you can track your athletes, and we also have reports that I'll show you in a second. So that's the training application. And then I want to show you the reports. Okay, so periodically you're going to get reports from us, and we'll give you some suggestions, and then we'll also give you a breakdown of where your athletes are in the training, along with highlighting some potential problem areas. So, in this team, this is obviously a man, so this is a coach, so obviously you disregard this, but this, I don't know if this is a coach or an athlete, but she's a little behind on the workouts where everybody else is on workout 18, 19, or 20, and then she hasn't done her goals. So it looks like she did work out 3, but she didn't do her goals for some reason. So that would be where you would get that feedback. And again, you can't read what her goals are or what her journal is, but you can know if she's doing the training or not and keeping up with all of her teammates. So that's really important feedback to keep people on track, obviously. And then we have an aggregate score of their assessments. So you can see where your athletes are and where they're improving according to our 6 core principles that we teach. Okay, so, and feel free to chime in. We can do some questions at the end, or you can ask any as they come up. So what can you expect from implementing positive performance mental training? And the first thing that I hear a lot from coaches is that they have better practices. And what we teach is a pre-practice visualization exercise that takes about 3 to 5 minutes. Coaches and athletes generally do it together. It's really simple, and it just gets everybody focused on the task at hand. And it's just really, really powerful. It's such a great use of time because, a lot of times, as you know, athletes are there, but they're not really there. They're coming from class, or, they had a fight, or they have a test later, or whatever. And they're there, but they're not mentally really ready. And so, at least in my experience, we would not be ready, and then the coach would get irritated because he's ready, and then we'd get hesitant because we didn't want our coach to get mad, and everybody's frustrated, and nothing's really happening, and the whole practice sort of spirals. And I don't know if anybody else had that experience, but I remember that well. And so it really gives coaches a lot of peace of mind, knowing that their athletes have the tools for that big game on Saturday, that they don't, the athletes, they didn't really know who was going to show up. And the athletes now have those tools literally at their fingertips to get themselves ready. We're seeing more wins. That's not something that we promise, obviously, but that's something that we're seeing. And I think a lot of that comes down to better practices and athletes' ability to have tools when they really need them. One of the things athletes ask me before they've even tried mental training, they're like, what do I do here in the middle of a game when I'm struggling? And my answer is you have to do stuff ahead of time. It's like trying to get in shape during a game. Like you have to do mental training ahead of time. But having those tools and being comfortable with that pressure because you've trained yourself, really can help in those clutch situations, which can lead to more wins. Recruiting, a lot of coaches are telling me they're telling parents about this, and the parents are really excited that their athlete is going to be taken care of and given the tools because they know what a challenging situation they're going into and how how maybe ill prepared they are in some cases. Very cost effective. I know budget is always a concern, and we've tried really hard to give options to all different budget levels, and trying to make mental training affordable. But it's also an investment, and I feel when I look at my college career, I mentioned in the beginning, I had some teammates that there was a lot of money spent on them. And I feel like if they had just spent a little bit more on mental training, that investment of tuition and room and board and time even from my coaches there could have been such a payoff from that because the athletes really wanted to be good. They just didn't have the mental skills. And, obviously time is always an issue for coaches and athletes. This is not a lot of time. Coaches have to buy into this for it to work, but it's not a lot of time investment. It's more about structuring it and doing a little bit every day, like a 5-minute pre-practice, for example. Your athletes can do a 20-minute workout. They can do a 10-minute guided visualization, like I said, on the back of the bus, or, icing after practice. Like they're very manageable chunks of time. Some of our clients, this is a ever-growing list, but certainly if you want to talk to any colleagues, I know that can be pretty interesting for coaches.